tradition for the knights when they take their knighthood. They take like a vow of like chastity,
Okay.
um, because they're married to
The
um,
sword.
The
they're not married
rose.
to they're married to the rose. So whoever the rose is, which I don't have that wholly solidified in my head yet.
Okay. But there is a figure that is the rose.
Yeah, and it could be that the rose is a title. Maybe at some point it was Beauty. Maybe
Right.
at some point it was Snow White. And then that person either, because maybe that's generations ago, and that person has passed. And then the rose is just a title.
Cool. Can I say something to add to that?
Yep.
So one concept that I was sort of thinking about for this was that you can be powerful physically or have like mental capacities that are powerful, but something that is like even more important in this world is your reputation. Like you're not the dragon unless you have the reputation of being the dragon of the woods or whatever it is. So like I feel like you're on the right track with DC with your character too. Like your character I think is on this mission to build their own legend in a way, right?
Yeah. And that gave me an idea actually. For Noxus culture.
Cool.
That the reason that all of the Knights of the Rose and all of the what's the word I'm thinking of? The class system is kind of based on if your family comes from a person of lore. So it's like we are of like Snow White's bloodline. We are of Beauty's bloodline. Little Red Riding Hood's bloodline. And those are tales that like aren't confirmed exactly. It's like so far back that nobody really knows if it's true, but that's the way that people hold it up. So it's like if you have the bigger the legend behind your family, the higher up you kind of began in that particular society.
So like Arthurian legend kind of stuff.
Right. So like maybe the king or queen or whoever of your castle of that nation is like a child of Arthur or something like that,
Cool. An idea that I was having is that a lot of this takes place in the woods. Like I don't know how much takes place outside of the woods. So there's it's just like there is like a kingdom, I guess, of the woods, and maybe it's subdivided into various like districts if it was a city, but it's not. Like we could divide it into different
regions.
Yeah, like regions. And perhaps this culture is sort of in like a central region of some kind. They sound like they they sound like they would be a powerful group of people to me.
What do they do? Do they like defend towns and whatnot from the evil creatures lurking in the woods, or what's?
I think
so. If I can make a suggestion, so like civilization versus wilderness is a pretty common like theme in stories, and I think that you see that a lot in fairy tales too. Like in Beauty and the Beast is located kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and story of Rose Red and Snow White that takes place in a cottage out in the middle of nowhere, or Little Red Riding Hood, for example. Probably some other shit I'm not thinking of. What if instead of the woods being their own culture, like this established culture, if the established kingdoms are located outside the woods and are at odds with whatever's in the woods, if that makes sense. So I mean, maybe it could be like a culture, but there's some mystery around it, or it's like there's a lot of things that are unknown about what's in the woods. Yeah.
I have an idea that's sort of along those lines. I was thinking of if any of you have seen Castle in the Sky, how there's the city at the end of the film has like a giant tree, and it's very incorporated into the nature aspect. And I'm thinking maybe that's one culture that's sort of the woods, but there's civilization and a lot of stuff going on there. And then there's one that's very far away from that, and there's this large span of woods between them. And inside of those woods, maybe strange things happen. Maybe it's not so safe to be there. All of the sorts of mythical stuff that's going on with our characters and the history behind them. Like the woods is that setting that people are still very people can't really figure it out. It's a place of mystery.
Could there be I think I want to subdivide the woods a little bit more so that it's not just all one like I almost don't want to pit all like enchanted things versus all non-enchanted things. I think there can definitely be like the deep part of the woods that's the place where the strange things happen.
Yeah.
But I think I still want there to be like room for enchanted characters to still be somehow part of the like civilization in a way that's still like meaningful. And
well, I feel like a lot of sort of folklore takes place on the edges of civilization, right?
Yeah.
It's where you have these towns that are in the forest somewhere. Sure, like it's part of Germany or Burgundy or wherever, but like it's in the wilderness away from the established cities and whatnot. And so I don't know how the group feels about this, but we could have these cultures that are the dominant cultures and maybe civilizations that own places, and those cultures inform how the people act and behave and feel about things in these towns and small cities in the woods. But by and large, we're all surrounded by this setting of the woods. Does that work for people?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that works for me. I think I would want to keep this like the scope small, I guess. Not small, but like I think one town would be really cool, but I'm really interested to see the like politics of the enchanted creatures and the like feuds between those people too.
Right.
So who are the enchanted creatures? Was the thinking that enchanted creatures would be in the woods, or are they like kind of sprinkled all across this world, or
I mean, I feel like some of them might live in civilization as well, depending on what is like culturally like acceptable in the civilization that exists. Right. I mean, the one way I was thinking about it is like, I was thinking about capitalism and like how like you can be like the scum of society until you're suddenly useful to the people that are in charge, and then also you're like, oh, maybe you're not so bad. Like you're actually kind of useful to me. So I feel like
also known as any 90s movie.
So I feel like there are enchanted things that coexist with the mundane, as well as living in the woods.
Is it like an open thing, or is it like, oh yeah, Gertrude, she heals the town, but actually she's a hag? Like,
I think so. I think people like, well, what do you guys think? Do you think like enchantments should be things that are obvious to people, or like do people just know, or?
Maybe it's that there's certain levels to it. There are small things that are very familiar.
Right.
But I like the concept you were talking about earlier about the deep woods. And so maybe there's this connection where small things, creatures, information, lore come out of the deep woods.
Cool.
But like nothing goes in. And so there's this like drip feed of enchanted stuff that affects the world. and it becomes the stuff that you're like, oh well, this is of use to us. We can have like a XYZ here.
Cool. Yeah, I think the vibe that I'm kind of getting is maybe for the three cultures, and tell me if this works for all of you, but could one of them be like the rose and like the kingdom? One of them be like the like bright woods or like the outer woods and like the people of those like the villages and stuff, and then the third one could be like the dark, like the deep woods or whatever.
Yeah,
would that work?
That makes a lot of sense.
Like it's sort of like a gradient.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let's divide it up that way then.
And do you feel like, sorry if I may ask, do we feel like those cultures are at odds, or are they working together, or are some, is there something that's very untenable about the deep woods that is very covetable by the cultures surrounding it, or the kingdom wants to get in there because there's something about it that is either vital or important or covetable in some way that they need to take over?
My feelings on that would be, I feel like Fae mythology is a great place to look to for sources of that kind of conflict, where like with Fae myths, like Fae courts, you have these societies of monsters or fairies, and they have their own set of moral values and things that they care about that are very different from the things that mortals care about. And so it's less that necessarily, Fae aren't necessarily evil in most cases. They just care about different things, like alienly different things, in ways that maybe humans would find threatening, either metaphorically or literally. And in a similar sense, humans wanting to avoid that kind of stuff can end up being a threat to Fae creatures. So I kind of like the idea that maybe the monsters of the deep woods maybe aren't necessarily evil, but they have some set of values regarding wilderness and magic that doesn't necessarily hold human and mortal life in high regard. And humanity, like the kingdom trying to, create a civilization, maintain control over these places and whatnot, finds that to be a threat and thus pushes back.
It's like a cultural tightrope that's being walked, and humans don't really understand the principles of Fae.
And then in the middle, you've got like the people who, like, you've got some people who are like, stay out of the deep woods, Jimmy, or you'll get eaten by a Spriggan. But they're also like, yeah, all those people over in the castle there have all these ideas and all these taxes and whatnot, and like, so they're not necessarily I feel like the deep woods and the rose would be almost diametrically opposed, and then the bright woods are just sort of caught in the middle, where they're not really winning with either group, but they're not fully losing with either group either.
Yeah, see, that's what I was getting at. I think that's a great sort of conflict to have, in terms of the two cultures wanting to get at each other, with the middle ones sort of having a little bit of both.
I think it almost makes the Brightwoods, like, for me anyway, the really interesting area of the world, because they're caught between these two competing forces. Oh yeah, I'm totally into that. One thing that we didn't do, and I feel like we should do it because it's important, and I should have done it first, is just talk about our veils and our lines for the game. For anyone that doesn't know what veils or lines are, it's for us to be able to communicate about subject matter that we might find uncomfortable, that we just don't want to get into, because first and foremost, this is a game and we're doing it to have fun, so we don't want anyone to not have fun while we're playing. So the concept between veils and lines basically is that anything that we put behind a veil can exist in the world, but when it comes up in the story, we sort of fade to black on the scene. And so it still happens, but it's not on camera. And then things that we put behind a line do not exist in the world at all. And if we
Okay.
and we don't have to